There is a specific smell that belongs to a British kitchen on a Sunday afternoon and nowhere else on earth. Something that has been on the hob for 2 hours, or just come out of the oven wrapped in a tea towel, or is sitting in the dish it has always lived in waiting to be carried to the table. 20 British comfort foods are on this list. Some of them you will remember the moment you read the name. Some have nearly vanished, and at least one of them you have probably never eaten, even though your grandparents had it every week. Here's what happened to all of them. If you grew up in Lancashire or Yorkshire, you knew the tripe shop. It was on the high street, often between the butcher and the fishmonger, and it sold tripe pre-cleaned and ready to cook, cow stomach lining, simmered slowly in milk with sliced onions until tender, soft, with that pale honeycomb pattern that was distinctive enough to be unmistakable. Specialist tripe shops once lined British high streets and were considered unremarkable. By the 1980s they were already thinning, by the 90s mostly gone. The objection is never about the flavour, it is about knowing what it is. Not a delicacy, a test. You walked into the shop and there they were, in white china bowls, wobbling slightly as they were set down. Chopped eels boiled in spice stock, cooled until the natural gelatin set, served cold with a splash of vinegar. An East End staple since the 18th century, when eels were so abundant in the Thames they were the cheapest protein the city had. At the end of the Second World War there were more than 100 eel, pie and mash houses in London. By 1995, 87. Today, very few. The river was declared biologically dead in 1957, the eels thinned out, and the culture thinned out with them. Minced pork offal, liver, heart, lungs. Mixed with breadcrumbs, herbs and onion, formed into small balls, wrapped in cool fat, and baked until golden. Served with mushy peas and thick onion gravy. A Midlands and Welsh staple, made from the parts of the pig that most modern butchers don't display, by people who understood that using everything was not poverty, it was skill. Frozen supermarket versions still exist, but the homemade faggot, made in a kitchen from an animal someone knew, is very nearly gone. A pig's head slow cooked with herbs until the meat fell from the bone, pressed into a mould overnight, and sliced cold with bread and pickles the next day. Nothing wasted, everything used. The people who made Brawn understood something about an animal that most modern kitchens have completely lost, that the head was not the leftover, it was the point. Finding a butcher who still stocks a pig's head is now a project rather than an errand. That tells you everything, and a green sauce ladled over the top that was called liquor, and tasted of parsley, and something slightly mineral that came from the water the eels had been cooked in. Manze on Tower Bridge Road has been open since 1902 and is still serving today. The shops have declined sharply since the 1980s, not extinct, not yet, but the ones that remain are conscious of what they are preserving, which is how you know something is ending. After Sunday dinner, before the washing up, somebody scraped the roasting tin. The fat that had collected in the bottom was poured into a bowl and left to cool. It set into 2 layers, a pale, solid layer on top, and underneath it a dark, intensely flavourful jelly of cooking juices and meat sediment. Both were spread onto thick white bread with a pinch of salt. The flavour of that dark jelly on white bread is something that anyone who grew up with it describes in terms usually reserved for much grander dishes. Not a habit, a ritual. Health concerns about saturated fat ended it by the 1980s. The roasting tin still produces the same thing. Almost nobody saves it. Tiny brown shrimps from Morecambe Bay, preserved in spiced clarified butter with mace, cayenne and nutmeg, served in small ceramic pots spread on toast, the cold butter melting against the warm bread, a Victorian seaside treat that became a celebrated regional delicacy. The Morecambe Bay fishery still produces them. You can still buy them, but you have to look, and most people under 40 have never tasted one, which means the knowledge of what they are is already beginning to thin at the edges, not disappearing, fading. It appeared on the school dinner menu, and the name made everyone laugh every single time without exception. A steamed suet pudding studded with dried currants, first recorded in Alexis Sawyer's 1849 cookbook, The Modern Housewife. Served hot with custard, proper custard, made from eggs and cream, or bird's powder at a pinch. The name has become a source of amusement and embarrassment in roughly equal measure. A Flintshire Council famously renamed it Spotted Richard on their canteen menu in 2009 to avoid complaints, and then reversed the decision after the story went national. The pudding itself is not complicated to make. It requires a steamer and about 2 hours. which is precisely 2 hours more than most people are prepared to give a pudding on a weeknight. Dead man's arm, that was what the school dinner canteen called it, which was either inspired or deeply questionable depending on your relationship with sweat pastry. Proper name: jam roly-poly. Sweet pastry rolled flat, spread with jam, rolled up, steamed or baked, then served in thick slices with a lake of custard around them. The name came from the shape of the steamed version wrapped in cloth. It still appears on pub menus occasionally. It doesn't need to be made more exciting. It needs to be made more often. A thick, warming broth made from beef, lamb, vegetables, and usually a splash of Madeira wine. Served at Victorian formal dinners, and, at its most prestigious, at royal banquets. It was the soup that defined respectable British hospitality for half a century. By the late 20th century it had become a shorthand for bland British cooking, a joke made by people who hadn't tasted it. A well-made brown Windsor soup is genuinely satisfying, not bland, misunderstood. Its reputation destroyed it before its flavour could defend it. Pilchards or sardines baked inside a pastry crust with their heads poking up through the pastry, arranged to face the sky. From the fishing village of Mousehole in Cornwall, made to commemorate Tom Bawcock, who sailed into winter storms on the 23rd of December and caught enough fish to save a starving village. The heads protruded to prove there were fish inside. It is eaten every year on Tom Bawcock's Eve in Mousehole and almost nowhere else. Not a recipe, a remembrance. Smoked haddock, rice, hard-boiled eggs, curry powder, butter, parsley. Adapted from the Indian dish khichdi by British colonial officers and brought back to Victorian breakfast tables. Substantial, savoury, genuinely excellent. Modern breakfast preferences require no preparation, and Kedgeree requires the opposite. Not a complicated dish, a patient one, and patience is what the modern breakfast has entirely run out of. Split peas soaked and boiled into a thick golden mass, served alongside boiled ham or saveloys. The subject of one of Britain's oldest nursery rhymes: peas pudding hot, peas pudding cold, peas pudding in the pot, 9 days old, which was not a children's song but an accurate description of how working families ate, not a recipe, a necessity dressed up as a rhyme. Mushy peas survived by attaching itself to fish and chip. Peas pudding stayed in the northeast, still found in sandwich shops in County Durham and Tyneside, and almost nowhere else. Two versions of the same idea. One survived, one didn't. The difference was a chip shop. Scotch broth, mutton and barley, or whatever the family version was called, made on a Monday from the bones of Sunday's joint, and eaten through the week as the flavour deepened. Not a recipe so much as a practice. A large pot started from bones on a Monday morning, eaten through the week, tasting better on Wednesday than it did on Monday, and better still on Friday. It ended when the Sunday joint ended, and when making stock became something that required more planning than most mornings allow. Not a dish, a discipline, and the discipline went first. Beef or game, slow cooked until very soft, shredded finely, seasoned, packed tightly into small ceramic pots, and sealed under a layer of clarified butter to preserve it. Eaten spread on toast or bread. Shippams sold it in glass jars from the 1900s onward, the ancestors of the paste sandwiches that millions of children took to school. Shippam's paste still exists in a few supermarkets. The practice of making it at home from a proper cut of meat is effectively gone, not forgotten, replaced by something thinner and easier, in a jar, on a shelf, that tastes of almost nothing and lasts indefinitely. Not traditional, not handmade. Nobody's grandmother invented them, but Findus Crispy Pancakes, golden breadcrumbed parcels of minced beef or cheese or ham and cheese cooked from frozen in 12 minutes, were a comfort food of a very specific and entirely British kind, the kind that appeared on weeknight tables without ceremony and made children unreasonably happy. That is not a lesser form of comfort. That is comfort doing exactly what it is supposed to do. Introduced in 1958, discontinued in 2002, relaunched under Bird's Eye in 2019. The relaunch exists. It is not the same. Lamb's kidneys, split and grilled or fried quickly in a hot pan with butter, mustard, Worcestershire sauce and cayenne, served on toast. A Victorian and Edwardian breakfast staple, the kind of dish that appeared on the country house sideboard alongside the Kedgeree and the kippers. The flavour is intense, savoury, and completely unlike anything on a modern breakfast menu. The obstacle is the kidney, which requires a butcher who stocks offal and a cook comfortable handling it. Both are increasingly rare, not a difficult dish, a vanishing one. Leftover mashed potato and cooked cabbage or Brussels sprouts pressed together into a flat cake and fried in a pan until the outside is crispy and the inside is soft. Named for the sound it made while cooking, made on a Monday from Sunday's leftovers. No recipe, no planning, only leftovers and a pan. It ended when the Sunday roast ended and the supply of Monday leftovers dried up. It still exists, but requires someone to have cooked enough on Sunday to have something left over. Not a recipe, a consequence. And when the cause went, the consequence went with it. Made from a calf's head to mimic turtle soup, a luxury beyond most budgets. Mrs Beeton included it. Lewis Carroll put a mock turtle in Alice in Wonderland, melancholy and weeping for the lessons he no longer had, which turns out to be a surprisingly accurate description of what happened to the dish itself. It disappeared as the calf's head became something most butchers stopped stocking. The name survives in Carroll's pages. The dish does not survive anywhere else. Beefsteak and kidneys in a rich gravy, encased in suet pastry and steamed for several hours until the pastry is soft and yielding, and the filling has collapsed into something deeply savoury. Not a pie, which bakes, a pudding, which steams. The distinction matters because the texture is completely different, softer, more yielding, the pastry almost collapsing into the gravy at the edges. It still appears on pub menus but is almost never made at home. Steaming something for 3 hours on a weeknight requires a relationship with your kitchen that most people no longer have. The dish exists. The time it requires has gone. That is 20. Some are hanging on. Some are down to a handful of places that know they are among the last. All of them came from a Britain that made food from what it had, took time over it, and wasted nothing. A Britain where the Sunday joint became Monday's broth and Tuesday's sandwiches and Wednesday's bubble and squeak, and nothing left the kitchen until it had been everything it could possibly be. What they all need is someone to make them. What they all had was someone who did. Tell me in the comments, which of these have you actually eaten? Which one surprised you most? And is there a dish I missed that deserves to be on this list? If you found this worth your time, subscribing helps me know there's interest in these topics.